All right. Well, I am very excited to welcome Lacey Bundy to the podcast. She's the Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer and Secretary of PetSmart, which is for those of us who have pets, one of the favorite companies in America and around the world. Before that, she was the Senior Vice President at GC and Corporate Secretary of Express Inc. For those who don't know, a specialty retail and apparel company. She, before that, spent a number of years at Kirkland & Ellis, the great firm in their Chicago office, their head office. Before that was a CPA with Ernst & Young. So she's got a lot of really interesting background, serves on the PetSmart Foundation board, has spoken and written many times about topics that we'll cover. And I think, you're going to really enjoy learning a bit of Lacey's unique perspective on what it takes to be a great leader in the GC space, what it takes to mentor and train those along the way, and some of the lessons learned during the course of her career. So Lacey, welcome. I'm really excited to do this.
Thanks so much for having me, Craig. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So I want to start a bit with the accounting background because I think that's pretty unique. I mean, we're seeing accountants get a bit into the space of law firms. Certainly it's been happening for a while in Australia and the UK. We're starting to see some, a bit of an invasion in the US, and we'll see how the bar deals with all that. So far, it hasn't happened in any kind of full way like it has in the UK and Australia. But talk a bit about being an accountant and a lawyer and seeing big law, big four accounting. Talk about some of the differences that you see between those professional services organizations and what can big law learn from accounting firms?
That is such a great question. I think one thing, I think that the accounting firms do a really, really nice job with professional development. I think they have always invested in that probably to a greater extent, and it's been more institutionalized. So I think when I compare it to the law firm environment, you're typically learning, at the right hand of, the partners who you're working for. And I would say at the accounting firm, it tends to be a bit more institutionalized. So there's a lot more formal type training programs. And I think part of the reason that has come into play is accounting firms have been forced to be a bit more, I think by the clients, to be a bit more efficient with their time. And it's because of the business model and the way they price their work. So, when you're bidding out on an audit engagement, you're bidding against, the three others in the big four. It was big five when I was there. You have to be price competitive. And that tends to be, often for them as well. I'm not necessarily maybe a loss leader, but it's not the big profit driver necessarily. But they have to be really efficient. And so I think that is one, I would say, sort of professional development and how they've institutionalized that a bit more. I think that is one thing. And so the way they invest in that talent. And then the other thing I would say that I think that the law firms really could learn from them is, how to think more creatively and be more efficient in how the work is done. Now, that can't always be the case because not all work in the legal space is commodity type work, like the audit work, for example. But I think they have been able to, through their own tracking and measurement, figure out a way to be profitable using a different model than the billable hour model. And so I think if more companies, I think, will start to gravitate potentially to some of these disruptors in the space, if they're able to provide, a better, cost value proposition. And so I would expect to start to see that more in the commodity type work as a start, and sort of people get a toehold in there. And then, so you may end up sort of having this bifurcation, sort of the commodity work, and then, what other people consider, if I need a Ferrari for something, I'm willing to pay for a Ferrari. And so I think you're going to maybe see some of that bifurcation if you start to see some more non-traditional type players emerge in the U.S. like they have in other markets.
It's interesting. What do you think will kind of push? There's this delicate dance between law firms and their clients in terms of, you hear clients talk a lot about, just give me a fixed fee, just price it out, which of course is what most of the companies have to do for their businesses, right? I mean, they're really just asking law firms to create some certainty around the product they're delivering. Do you think the technology around the ability to be transparent about pricing arrangements, or showing, okay, we've spent as of today this much against the budget? What are the things that you think, or will it be the competition from the consultants and accounting firms that'll finally force law firms to do more and GCs to accept more fixed fee arrangements?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think the story is yet to be written on this. I know GCs for a long time, the customers of the law firm work have been pushing for fixed fee in a lot of cases in the past. I think that we still haven't sort of found an unlock there, at least from where I sit. On the more commodity work, I would say yes. I think, that does work. I think the challenge is, no one case is alike. And so that does make it a bit more challenging in certain spaces. No M&A deal is alike. Even if I think back on my own career, some of the more difficult deals and where you ended up spending the most time on were the smaller deals, because maybe, the level of materiality is smaller. And so, you really had to dig in, and some of those ended up being much more complicated. So I do think that's a challenge. I think from a technology standpoint, I do think tracking will help. I will also say that at the end of the day, I had somebody ask me this question the other day: how close are you scrutinizing our bills? I would tell you, if we have to scrutinize the bill that closely, we probably don't have the right partner. And then and to that end, what I would say is, we get our bills, we look at what the bottom line fee is, and does that feel like, just as a gut check when we get the bill, does that feel like we got that value for it? We would certainly rather, the law firm give us, sort of value-based billing, and sort of really look at the end of the day and say, gosh, here's what the value we provided, because we understand you also are in the business, you're training associates along the way, and sometimes they can't be as efficient. And so we understand that, but I think that the law firms are doing that up front to understand that, okay, we can't maybe bill for every single minute that was spent on this because it wasn't efficient. But I think just doing that sort of gut check at the back end and saying, look, here was, this feels right for the value we provided in this deal before a bill goes out to us. Those are the types of partners we like to work with.
So you get to the crux of an issue that you've spoken about a fair amount, which is creating a relationship of trust and how to do that. I know a lot of younger professionals will listen to this podcast and want to understand, what can I do as a younger lawyer on a team to get somebody as high up as Lacey to feel that she can trust the value that we're delivering, and that I can play a role in establishing that trust. If you go back to your younger self, your Kirkland days, and kind of project it onto maybe different types of firms, what would you tell your younger self that you may not have known, or maybe you intuitively knew it and it'd be good for others to know it?
There's probably one piece of overarching advice I give to any lawyers who work for me and in-house. And I would also, I think this holds true for outside counsel as well, is I want to work with people who think and act like an owner. So pretend just like when I'm giving advice here, I'm always thinking about, okay, if I owned PetSmart outright, right, what would I do? And I always try to put myself in the client's shoes. I'm not sure, if I owned this business, what would I do? What's the recommendation that I would make? Because we are paying for your advice, and you are experts. The reason we've engaged you is because you are experts in things we are not experts in. And so we really do need people to have a point of view or an opinion. So you can lay out all of the risks, But at the end of the day, we want you to have a point of view. And our gut may react to what you said and say, I'm not so sure. And we may have a conversation about that, right? But I always want my outside counsel to have a point of view and particularly putting themselves in our shoes and thinking and acting like owners. I think that it is an early career associate. I think, the most important thing you can do, I think, aside from what I just talked about, is being reliable in terms of responding to your clients and helping them think ahead. Probably the worst thing you can do is sort of drop something on and I know you all are working really, really late hours. It's been a long time for me since I've been in law firm life, but I know you're working really long hours. And so to send something across at, 10 p.m. and say, oh my gosh, this is urgent. I need this, by 7 a.m. the next morning or whatever, trying to think ahead so you're not putting the client in that situation where you can. That's not always possible, but where you can, just remember that, you're sort of, something might be all consuming for you and you might have a whole bunch of other things going on. We also have a lot of other things going on too. And so just, again, I think empathy is probably the best thing in all of these things I just shared. Just put yourself in the client's shoes. What would I want? If you just keep that in your head, you're going to be golden.
I love that. And you speak so eloquently on this concept of imposter syndrome and kind of, I'm sure, unbelievably for anybody who would be listening to you today wouldn't appreciate that you would ever have had imposter syndrome, but it is prevalent, especially it appears in younger lawyers and sometimes in women lawyers, although now it's really, you hear about it in both genders, but it's there. Are there things that you kind of talk to your younger lawyers at PetSmart or Express or the other where you've been before about how to help a young lawyer who has what they sense is imposter syndrome so that they have the confidence to stick their neck out and tell you what their actual opinion is?
So, Craig, I just came back from last week. I spent 2 days in Napa, this really incredible retreat that has been going on for a number of years. Law firms sponsor it, and they send their best and brightest up-and-coming women associates to it. Their general counsels come together from all over the country as well to provide mentorship. And we just had an entire session on imposter syndrome, insecurities, navigating through that. What I would say is, I think we just need to really keep talking about it. And so I think particularly people in my seat, people in leadership positions need to talk about their own experiences, because I think oftentimes what it is, people feel so alone. Like, I must be the only person that feels this way, and they're afraid to talk about it. And I think if the more we can talk about it and normalize it, I think we will be able to get through. One, if you talk about it, other people can give you advice and they can offer, their own perspective and their help. But if you're sort of suffering in silence, there's, nobody can help you. And I think more leaders speaking out about it will make more people feel comfortable and say, gosh, I feel that way. And there are things that I, still have to push myself to do in this day and age, things that, maybe are uncomfortable. And so I think navigating, what is imposter syndrome? What is just, insecurity? What's sort of a lot of people, there was a lot of people up on the stage at this program I was at last week. They're like, oh my gosh, I was so nervous to get up here and, what was I going to say? And these are general counsels, right? And so the associates are probably thinking, how is this possible that they are nervous getting up in front and talking to us? But I think that is a really natural thing. And so how we harness that insecure energy or whatever to push ourselves. There was a really impressive gal that spoke there from the diversity lab, Karen Ulrich Stacy, and she talked about one of the real indicators for one of the studies they did in terms of success in career at law firms. And she mentioned that it really is so much is about grit and overcoming challenges. And so, I had a really great conversation with a young associate last week, and, she was talking about some of the hardships, that she had experienced. And I thought about, Karen's talk. And I thought, gosh, instead of feeling like, well, this is happening, to me, maybe this is happening, for me. Maybe this is going to be what helps propel me, makes me stronger, and I will go farther because of this experience.
It's a fascinating observation that we can see an analog between, frankly, how our bodies react to things physically, to more psychological or softer things. I mean, you don't get in shape unless you put your body under some form of stress, and you can't be empathetic unless you really take the time to be vulnerable enough to have a conversation with somebody where you elicit reality, right, from the other person. If we're going to pretend and put on airs with each other, we never really get to the point where we're going to be vulnerable with one another. So we don't really understand what's going on in the other person's world. So we're just going to project what we think it must be. And of course, as you say, somebody in a position of power, you just assume, well, nothing ever goes on bad in their lives. They're where they are. It's a great point that the higher up you are, the more incumbent upon it is on you to kind of let go of that ego and kind of talk about some of the stuff that you had to overcome, right? So give a few examples, or one example of where you kind of had that moment where a leader allowed you to be vulnerable in a safe way and helped you get a leg up in the profession.
So when I was at Kirkland & Ellis, there was a partner there, Mark Browning, and I remember thinking at the time, gosh, I'm surrounded by all of these people that went to all these really fancy schools. And if I can just keep pace with my class, I'm going to feel pretty good about myself. I'm going to be patting myself on the back. And, I remember when it came time for annual reviews, and he asked me, what rating do you think you deserve for this year? And I said essentially basically what I just said to you, which is, look, I look around and I'm surrounded by really, really talented people, and I would be honored just to be considered with the class. And I remember him saying to me, damn it, Lacey. He said, if you aren't going to advocate for yourself and you don't believe that you're better than that, then how are you going to expect, how can you expect anybody else to do that for you? And, I already knew, I found out later, I think I already knew he had been advocating, and that the decision had already been made. I think that I was above the class. However, it was a really, really important lesson, right? In that, you have to believe in yourself. You have to advocate for yourself. And also, you need those people that are going to push you, right? When you maybe are afraid to advocate for yourself, or you're not sure if you're good enough, right? You need to surround yourself with people who are going to give it to you straight. And guess what? That doesn't always mean that it's going to be, sunshine and roses and all of those things. I mean, sometimes the best feedback can be really, I wouldn't say critical feedback, but it's feedback that helps you to get better. And you have to be open to that. So my current CEO, he gave me some really good advice. One time I was really struggling with a decision. And I remember him saying, he gives great advice always, but he really, I remember him saying to me, he said, no one had ever said this to me in a business setting before. He said, well, Lacey, what is your gut telling you? And I think he knew that I already probably had the answer if I just checked in with my gut. But I was just having a hard time getting there. And honestly, it's probably one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received in the business world, because I just didn't believe. I think before that, I was like, there's no place for gut instinct or, feeling in the workplace. And, I think, Craig, you spoke a bit about it. There's a lot to the mind-body connection, and there's things that your body is processing faster maybe than or subconsciously than your conscious brain is. And so this idea of listening to your gut, it's not necessarily irrational, right? It's just, our bodies are so amazing and complex in how we process information. So I really loved, I really loved that piece of advice too, but it's leaning on, your own instincts and always trusting. I think you can get so many people out there are going to have opinions and advice that they want to share with you. And it's going to be colored by their own experiences. And every single journey, I think, is beautiful. And every single struggle that everybody goes through is beautiful sort of in its own way. And it's going to be very different for everybody. And so be really also very judicious, I think, with the advice that comes your way. And you get to make that choice and, to what you adopt and take with you and what you don't. So I think leaning on your own intuition is always the best policy.
I think I've only done 30 of these, and I think you've finally allowed me to crystallize what I think the purpose of this podcast is, which is deconstructing what ultimately becomes your gut. Like successful people's, what are the ingredients in the cake that make up your gut instincts? So I'm going to ask you a super unfair question, especially for somebody as humble as you, but if you were going to say, Kirkland, recruits, as you say, from all the best. It's one of the top law firms. And so you were able to kind of exceed expectations as a young associate at Kirkland. What do you think you brought with you to the table as a young lawyer that you can't learn in law school? And who gave it to you, if it was a person or was it an experience?
I would say I am somebody that sort of runs two challenging things. I always, I don't want to let anything beat me. So maybe I have a little bit of a competitive streak inside me. But it's always with myself. I'm always just competitive with myself. So I like to practice yoga. I like to hike and all of those things. Most of my things are very solitary. And when I set a challenge for myself, I go after it. I thought, gosh, I can't let this, anything I've done, I'm like, I can't let this place, if I've had a tough day, I'm like, I can't let this place beat me. I remember there being a number of folks that people said, oh, you don't want to work for that person. You don't want to work for that person. I took that as a challenge. I thought, you know what? I'm going to go check this out for myself. I believed as a young associate that, yeah, the hours were hard, but I thought about, this is like a residency for a doctor, except that I'm paid a lot of money. Unlike them, I have a little bit more control, and I am getting paid a lot of money to learn from the best and the brightest at what they do. And so I viewed all of those hours and all of that, whatever might have been obstacles, I viewed them as investments in myself that I knew would pay off at some point. And I believe you learn the most from people. And so the more variety of people that you can work from, right, you get different perspectives and you can say, gosh, I really like that person's perspective on this. And I really like that person's perspective on this. You might also say, gosh, that really wasn't cool. I didn't like how that partner treated me in that moment. And guess what? I would never do that. I'm never going to do that to somebody else or make somebody else feel that way. But how would you learn if you don't if you only work for the people that you think are just the very best leaders? How can you possibly create your own leadership style? And so to me, I think exposing yourself to different experiences. One of the other pieces of advice that same partner gave me, I remember calling him one day and I said, gosh, somebody asked me to work on this XYZ deal. And I said, I have no business doing anything in that space. And I remember him saying, and that's exactly what he said, and that's exactly why you should do it, Lacey. And so I think really, really pushing yourself, making yourself uncomfortable. I think one of the things I hear from women in particular is that they say, well, gosh, I'm afraid to do that. I'm afraid to put myself out there to do that. And I think for me, that's probably been part of my secret sauce. And it was encouraged by people who, I worked with. but it was really putting myself out there and not being, I wouldn't even say it was being afraid to fail. It was actually seen as an opportunity to,
right.
to prove that you could do it.
It's the definition of a growth mindset, right? It's Carol Dweck's whole theory. Push yourself to the opportunities. I had this dad who talked to every taxi driver and valet and knew their life story by the end. Of course, I find myself doing that. And now my sons who are older used to make fun of me for doing that. And they do it themselves, I see, when I'm with them. I actually happen to be in London right now. And I was just with my oldest son who's studying psychology at the University of Edinburgh and watched him kind of do the same thing with people. Do you talk to strangers? Is that one of the ways you learn?
Yeah. I do. It's funny that you say that, Craig, because I actually I don't post very often. I think probably on social media, I barely ever post. I'm more of I think what they call a voyeur. I'm more of a listener and I like to take it all in. But if I look back on my Facebook feed, probably the 5 posts I have, I think I posted about my Uber driver. And if you think about Uber and Lyft were started actually as really a community connector. It really wasn't it wasn't just about getting a ride from point A to point B and somebody providing a service. It was sort of this like community connection. Same with Airbnb. And, it was really like people were couch surfing and things like that, not just like renting a house. And so, I hear the most interesting stories from my Uber drivers. Now, some of them, as time has gone on, fewer of them maybe want to engage or talk, and that's okay too. But I have had some really, really interesting connections that way for sure.
Yeah, there is a lot of cultural wisdom. I mean, I just got my hair cut. I hope you like it. And I went downstairs and he took incredible pride. I mean, most people who cut my hair, it takes like 5 minutes and they say, thank you, we're done. And he spent like an hour with me and he was from Iran and had moved to London 7 years ago. And you just realize the richness of cultural wisdom that comes from different places in the world. And sure enough, I got some nuggets from him that you kind of bake it into what you call instinct, right? And at the end of the day, I don't know if you've read this, From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks, which gets a fair amount of play these days because it's kind of it's put into the happiness category. But basically Brooks makes the argument that, we're really facile with facts and things like that, numbers, up until we're about 30 or 35 years old. And then after that, our strength is really synthesis. It's why professors you want older professors as a general rule because they're constantly synthesizing, what they're learning and growing, which is, I think goes back to your instinct comment that you want to get to a place where you have a gut, and then you want to get to the place where you then trust it and kind of keep score. Oh, the times I trusted my gut, it actually worked out really well, and you get confidence in your gut. So it's I don't know. I think it's a great way to frame it.
Craig, I like that because there are times where somebody says, well, what is your gut telling you? And I'm like, I don't know. That's the problem. Those are the times, right? Those are maybe the decisions you struggle with, or wherever you've got, again, that's something to tune in as well. Why can't I hear that? What's going on? And so I think whatever your practice is, I think those are things you just sort of have to work through, whether it's journaling, whether it's meditating, whether it's exercising, whatever it is. But
reduce the noise.
That's a message in and of itself. You can't.
Yeah.
That's totally.
Yeah, it's totally. I mean, because we have so much noise. I mean, it's you've got to be able to every once in a while concentrate completely on something. And I always used to think it was really, I was the youngest by 10 years in my family. And so I'd always have the baseball game on while I did my homework, while something was on the TV, maybe playing a bit. And I always used to think I was the best multitasker alive until I got a little older and I realized sometimes you've got to learn how to unitask. It's a great lesson.
Craig, I just have to say that for all the women listening, I think everybody probably would say you're very brave for going to get a haircut in a new town by somebody you've never met before. So,
I do it a lot.
And it looks good. So I think you're winning today.
Yeah, I do it a lot because it's kind of, my hair's usually so short that if it gets screwed up, it's pretty easy to fix. So I don't make quite the investment that maybe others with longer hair would have to make. But, I travel a lot, as you know, Lacey, and I like to immerse a bit. It's part of what I think my job is as a connector in the firm, and making sure as a fully integrated law firm that we're actually able to provide a solution that makes sense for a client. And I don't think I can do that if I don't immerse and I don't understand the cultural differences. One thing I was going to ask you, because we had a Warsaw office, and when the politics changed, we in Poland, we closed it, unfortunately, because we had great people there. And a few of the women came up to me after I gave a speech and talked about vulnerability, which you talk about a lot, which I totally believe in. And they say, culturally, it's just really hard for a young woman to be vulnerable in our climate. Talk a little bit about, feeling safe, being vulnerable, but feeling safe in the world we live in. Is that a tension, to being authentic and vulnerable with men who are more senior? I mean, I know that's a sticky subject, but talk about that.
Well, first, I guess I would say that some of the best advice and mentors honestly have been men in my career. I don't know how it's worked out that way. I don't, maybe just coincidence. That's just, for me, that's been the case. So I personally, would say, and we talk about this a lot at PetSmart, we need everybody all in and invested to create a culture of inclusion and a safe space. It is incumbent on the leadership to set the tone at the top, no doubt about that. But this is really creating that open culture. And I know it sounds like you've read a lot of the same books I have. And Simon Sinek talks about creating this culture of safety. I think Adam Grant talks about it quite a bit as well. I think it really is on the leaders. And again, this is one that, and so I hope that actually more firms will have, more firms leadership, I should say, will be more open to this idea and creating that safe space. But here's what I would also say is it doesn't have to be at the firm. So if that doesn't feel, maybe that might not be the place for you, right? And so you have to have a network outside of the firm. Probably one of the people that gives me the best advice in my life is my husband. I should not his ego be like, if he heard this, it's like, I'd have to his ego be like getting all big. But I mean, really, and part of it is he's outside of the law. And so he gives me a completely different perspective. And I need that. And I think that's important because sometimes, especially early career associates, if you're finding that all of your friends work at the firm, your entire sort of your life becomes the firm. And so you need connections, contacts outside your firm, maybe outside the practice of law, to bring it back and give you some perspective, and probably a different perspective. So that safe space may not be for you in the firm. And maybe, and there are certain times where you wouldn't want it to be the firm. So I think it's important to have those connections outside and lean on those, in various times. You need different people and different types of connections for different things. Everybody's going to offer you something and something different. So I think just making sure you maintain those connections is important.
Such a great answer. I hope people will actually rewind and listen to that more than once, because to me, the reason why your husband's probably such a good advisor for you is that you don't narrate facts for him that are different from reality. I mean, I've been at believe it or not, the same law firm for 32 years. Like, have you ever heard of anybody like that? We merged, it was Hughes and Luce the first 17 or 18, and then K&L Gates after we merged, but, kind of going to the same building for 32 years. And I've watched a lot of people, as you can imagine, come and go. And you start to get your own gut about what happens when somebody makes a career decision. And some of it is this narration of facts that may be a little different from reality. Usually it involves not quite letting go of the ego. And so for your husband to really be a good advisor to you, you've got to be telling him the real deal. My spouse is the same for me. I don't go there very often because I kind of don't want to relive work very often with my wife, but I do know that if I'm gonna tell her something, I damn sure I'm gonna give the best I can. It's like a 12B6 standard, right? I'm gonna give the best interpretation of the opposing view to what I'm complaining about or concerned about, so that I don't get advice at the end of the day where she kind of goes, well, you've been complaining about this for like months. Why don't you just leave? So I think that authenticity with your mentors and your coaches is just a critical point. It really is, I think.
Yeah. And I like how you put a finer point on that in terms of making sure that, is this really true? I think that's one of the questions you have to ask yourself. I think, is this really true? Because sometimes your perceptions are not reality. And so, it's important to ask questions when maybe you might not always have it right. You might not always have the full picture. One of the longtime chairwoman at Express, who's been a wonderful mentor to me, I remember her, one of the things she's probably one of my favorite pieces of advice she's given me is she said, Lacey, if something doesn't make sense, then you do not have all the facts. And so it has, taught me, when something doesn't make sense to me, I'm like, okay, I'm missing something here. Do I need more time for things to fill in, or do I need to be going out and asking more questions? Because and it's proved to be really, really, really good advice. And also, so you don't make missteps, filling in those gaps with your own maybe assumptions or maybe misperceptions.
I mean, and to me, that's one of the many cases for diversity, equity, and inclusion, is so that you do have different types of people with different types of background and positions of leadership, because they're all going to come at it a little differently with their whole cocktail of experiences. So I've got a question for you that's a little off this beaten path, but I'm reading the book by that New York Times author on Jones Day. I don't know if you've seen it yet, Servants of the Damned. Have you heard about this book?
No.
So it takes Jones Day to task a bit. I won't editorialize for affiliating more and more over time with the more right-leaning agenda, including representing Trump. I haven't gotten to the part about January 6th, but I assume they're going to have some conversation around that. And it really dovetailed for me into the topic of ESG, which I can't imagine, you sit on a round table, I know with one of ours, where you don't get asked about, what does ESG mean for your organization? How does that fit? Before we get into that, which I do want to hear your thoughts on ESG generally, but do you think law firms and professional service organizations are going to need to take stands on Dobbs, of course, George Floyd's murder, issues related to January 6th? Are law firms in that game, or do clients really not care what positions or who their law firms have represented?
I kind of have a smile on my face right now, because I think this is such a good question, and I'm not hearing this question, I don't think, asked enough, and I don't think firms are asking their clients about this enough. What I would tell you is there's a number of different prongs to this, but the first thing I would say is I am not interested in engaging a firm who is going to be, sort of on the news for their own activities. And so I had this come up actually. We, at one of the companies I worked for, we had a firm and a partner who tweeted something very disrespectful, calling a woman the B word, the press secretary, Sarah Sanders. And what started happening after that is other folks started picking this up and tweeting at XYZ client. Is this who represents you at this client? Blah, blah, blah. I do not want any companies that I represent called out in that kind of a way or judged for the counsel that we have chosen on something. So I think law firms need to be very, very careful. I also know that, there are some, I don't even need to name the name. I think we know of one firm that's very political, is very out there, much out there in politics. That makes us nervous. I wouldn't say we don't work with them, but it does make us nervous. And I think all things being equal, we try to stay out of the fray as much as possible. We are a consumer-facing brand. Our consumers have very different points of view. Our associates have very different points of view. And so for a law firm to make a choice and decide to wade in sort of politically one way or the other, that's their prerogative. It's also our prerogative to choose who we work with. And so I would just ask the firms, I think it's important for the firms to be aware of that. I think you will have certain clients that maybe say, gosh, that really aligns with, or folks in my seat say, gosh, that really aligns with how we see the world. And so we want to give you our business. There's certainly going to be some of that. But that's not the place, from my seat, that's not where I prefer to be. I'd rather my law firm not making the news.
Yeah, the risk reward the upside isn't worth the risk, is what I hear you saying. And I also hear you coming back to your empathy point. Have the conversation with your client so you can be empathetic with your client about, who their customer base is, who their suppliers are, what sensitivities they might have on their board or any other topics. And then, think about the consequences accordingly. Of course, we're, almost 2,000 lawyers on 5 continents, and it's impossible to perfectly align with what every client would think politically. But it will be interesting to follow whether the press seizes on this. I mean, this isn't again, politics aside, I have great respect for Jones Day, certainly in the firms this writer talks about. But, the idea that he's taking shots at a law firm for who they've represented. It's an interesting new world we're venturing into, and I'll be curious to watch it and see how it plays out. But thank you. Those are great insights. So then talk about, ESG has so many components to it, and law firms, I think clients and law firms are guilty of paying lip service some to the components of ESG. What are the real deal? What's your gut on when when a law firm's activities are going to move in the right direction in terms of diversity and inclusion or sustainability or anything like that? Like, where can a law firm do something tangible that makes you say, okay, that's somebody I'm actually incented to work with?
Oh, I think for the law firms, I think it really is about what we would like to see. I think from where I sit is more diversity at the leadership ranks. And the reason for it is not just because I'm checking boxes. It really is about diversity. It's not the way you look. It's not any of those. It's really about the diversity of perspectives. And one of the things that's very frustrating to me from where I sit is I mentioned the Ladder Up retreat that I've been part of for a number of years. For so long we continue to hear from women in particular that I love what I do, but I don't feel like this is sustainable at the law firm. And I believe, I keep hearing it year after year after year, and that's a little embarrassing for, I don't know if it's embarrassing. I guess I'm embarrassed on behalf of the law profession that we're still having this conversation. And so I don't believe actually that there really will be disruption and innovation about how law firms serve clients. And in turn, I think doing the right thing for these really bright minds that we want to work on our work, until we have more women in particular at the table in the leadership roles, because there's something there. We know we've been talking about since I was there about women opting out. And I think there's lots of reasons for it, but I don't think, unless I can't speak to it because I've been gone for so long. I don't have the answers. But I do believe that when I was in Napa last week, some of those women who want to be equity partners, I do believe they probably have the answers. And so we need more of them to stay and ascend into leadership positions. I think there's more creativity in the law firm model. And I would hope that more diverse perspectives at that table will bring more of that to bear. And I also think it will, circling back to the earlier part of the conversation, these disruptors and these innovators that want to come into the space, you have to disrupt yourselves. And I don't think there's been enough of that happening at the leadership levels at the law firms. So that's my 2 cents on it.
I love it. And it's because, again, really what I hear you saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is the same vulnerability that you bring to a conversation as a human being, the organism that is the law firm or whatever organization you're talking about has to create the feedback loop, the vulnerability of the organization to actually have hard conversations and listen carefully to the perspectives of others. I mean, I thought as a society, a lot of society opened themselves up around George Floyd a little bit more to the kind of I'd summarize it this way, the statement that you would hear from the community, the African-American community, that stop making us educate you about how hard it is to be a Black person, in dealing with police. That was kind of what you heard, like, we shouldn't have to keep explaining this to you, and you need to do your homework first. And then, it's like what you're challenging law firms to do, which I think is right, is to open up organizationally to an authentic, candid feedback loop on all topics of diversity and inclusion. So, Lacey, how does the law firm, let's say I want to turn it into something mercenary and say I want to do more work for PetSmart or any company, how does the law firm show you they're doing that? Or is it kind of you want to hear it from the women and diverse lawyers that they're doing it and you kind of don't want it to be shown? What's the answer on that? For us, we are not about lip service. We're about substance. And so it's never about like, oh, you're going to give you the work because you're doing all of these things in DEI, right? That's not how we make decisions. It might be one factor in our decision making, but that's just going to be one factor in how we make our decisions. One of my personal pet peeves about ESG is, especially with what's going on, with SEC and asking for more disclosure, et cetera, et cetera. My fear is that we get so caught up in reporting and disclosure that, there's only a finite amount of resources available at a company. And I would much rather the firms, PetSmart, any other company invest in the work of the work as opposed to worrying about all of the different reporting regimes and how are we going to satisfy all these reporting regimes. I would much rather invest that time in actually making real progress. Yeah. And so I think that I can't tell you I've ever looked at any law firm's
CSR report. So I can't tell you that makes a decision for me. It's about the people at the end of the day, and folks like yourself, Craig, who I know are trying to do the right thing, and we're going to have open, honest dialogue. And your partner, Marissa Murillo, who I spoken with on a panel. I think she maybe moderated it on growth mindset. I think it's just aligning yourself and having this open dialogue. So I really commend you for doing more of this. But those are the firms we want to align on and make real substantive change, as opposed to, like I said, if you send us your CSR report, we probably aren't going to have time to look at it. So we want to support you, and we want to work on this together with you, is what I would say. I always look at diversity statistics in my own team. We are, attorneys in my team, we're 50-50 split, male-female. My leadership team is also 50-50. Now, on the paralegal side, according to Google, I don't know if this is true, like 1 in 4 paralegals are male. We don't have one male paralegal on our team. So our team skews more heavily towards women in our team. And I think we are going to continue to see that, because so many women are opting out of being at the law firm. And so we have less of a challenge there in-house. We do still have work to do on racial, ethnic diversity, I would say. And you all are such an important part of that, is the talent pipeline. So it's not just the universities, but then it's you all as the talent pipeline. You gave us incredible women who are opting out. But we want to work together with you, I would say, because you are such an important pipeline of talent, and we want to work with you. And we do hope that, like I said, we also have more women who will stick around at the law firms and want to partner with us long term to continue to create a pipeline that we all feel really good about.
Well, I mean, you are such a treasure, because I think, we always talk about the men who have mentored women, and clearly there was that period in our history where there was a lot more of that, just by pure numbers, that there were more men in positions of leadership. But there need to be more women like you. Like, my best mentors in my career just have happened to be women, and one in particular, a woman of color. But I had a strong mom. I was a policy debater in high school and college. My college debate partner was a woman who's gone on to do great things. The person I work most closely with on legal matters at the firm is a woman. My wife's a strong woman. It's like men need to be listening to strong women now that we're trying to get a little more equal. And I think, actually, I hope I'm right, that will lead to the retention of more women in the profession later stage, because they will see how satisfying it is to give back like you do, right? And so, I mean, women ought to be listening to what you say, and I hope they do. And by the way, Lacey's got other podcasts she's done, at least one that's published, and writings and things on this topic. But men ought to be listening, because that's how we get more intuitive. It's how we get more empathetic, and how we create space for each other to be great. Okay, I've got one last question. So you're a reader like I am. One book that you would leave that, kind of sticks with you from time to time, that if you were a lawyer, if you were Lacey at, year 5 as an associate at Kirkland, you would have loved to have read?
Ooh!
I know. Totally unfair.
That is such a tough one. I'm going to go with a book that changed my life in a time where I was doing some deep soul searching. And so it's not something you're going to find in the professional business development section.
Even better.
But it's called Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. Oh. And that's a book that I keep on my nightstand, and I could just open it up and I could read one paragraph, and that could be that could be a message for me, an inspiration for that day or whatever. But it really did change. It really did change my life. And so that's what I would leave you with.
Such a great choice. I've read it. Love it. Mine was Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, maybe for the same. I think it's like what you said earlier, we have to take advantage of our crises. We have to take advantage of our struggles, and either you crack your brain open and open yourself up to a different perspective when you're having a hard time, or you miss the opportunity to learn and grow. You have put in so many nuggets. You are so authentic. Like, you just are who you are. And really loved learning about you in preparation for this. We've interacted a little bit, but not much. And I know people are going to really enjoy getting to know you better and kind of using this as a little bit of a gemstone to come back to as their careers develop, and people even late stage in their careers, it'd be great for them as well. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Craig. And I am easily reachable on LinkedIn. So if anybody, I'm always open to having a conversation with anybody. So you can hit me up there if you want to have further dialogue. Thanks so much.